So I called the talk Using Blake, and I'm going to start with a quote from Northrop Frye. I was rereading Fearful Symmetry a few weeks ago. I've got the 1969 edition, and so he's had 20 or more years to consider Blake further on from the 1947 writing of the book itself. And it's a very interesting preface to the 1969 edition. And there was a passage that caught my eye. This is it. It's very short. He just says, Blake had the complete pragmatism of the artist who believes nothing, but is only looking for what he can use. And I recognize that last part of it, only looking for what he can use. It's kind of, it's how I feel my life goes when I'm working in the studio. Every day, everything that's coming towards me is being considered for inclusion in a painting in some sort of way, consciously anyway. But there's also something that I've noticed from observing my dreams over the years. And as Stephen showed you, he waved that book around, which was 30 odd years of dreams that I've recorded. There's some other part of me that's always on the lookout to use things. And it's got a mind of its own. It's got its own volition, and it's got its own point of view. And it seems to screen grab things from the day and to store them away with symbolic intent, that it seems to understand that these things can be used to communicate with me in my dreams and through my artwork as well. We'll come back to this idea as we go through the talk. So who did Blake himself use? Obviously he uses Swedenborg, he uses Jacob Boehme, he uses Lavater, Dante, Milton, of course, and even Reynolds and John Locke, who he profoundly disagreed with. All of these people were useful to him to refine his thinking for his work. And for us, Blake has joined that group. He's somebody that we can use to think about our times. And in a way, that's the theme of this talk. So the talk's in two parts. The first part's how I've used him in my work. And the second part is how I've used him in my outlook, I suppose. So the word outlook suggests it's looking outside of myself. So I would contrast that with my work, which seems to my artwork that seems to be always constantly looking within. I recently reviewed a book for the Blake Society on printmaking. And there was a chapter which Michael Phillips had contributed. And Michael, as you know, uses Blake's printing processes. And I was interested in the insights that he gains from actually using the process. And I hope that some of what I can offer tonight will be the result of me using Blake's mental process in a certain way. So first thing I should say is that I actually didn't decide to use Blake. It sort of happened organically. I want to show you a few steps on the road towards me coming to use Blake from a very different beginning. So, Ian, can we have the first slide, please? So this is one of my favorite paintings when I was a kid. Gauguin's Where Do We Come From? What Are We? Where Are We Going? From 1896. And it's a work that in which he tries to offer a kind of comprehensive myth of the whole of human life. And it's this comprehensiveness of the effort, the artistic effort in the work that I was interested in, I think. And I was also interested in sort of physics at the time. I was interested in astrophysics and particle physics, the physics of the small and the physics of the large. Again, I think that what was interesting me was this kind of idea that there's a kind of comprehensive explanation of the world that is offered within that kind of physics. And they're linked by this idea that even the scientists want a kind of complete myth of the world and the cosmos to exist within. So I was predisposed to, even before I'd heard of Blake, to find his work interesting. So, as I said, I didn't start in a Blakean style. Can we have the next slide, please, Ian? So these were interventions into nature that I was making in the 1980s, the late 1980s. And but what's going on in these pictures is a kind of repair of division. So the division here is between cultural things, even though that is a hyacinth, it's been bred for 500 years or so in Holland, and has taken on this hypertrophic form, very overdeveloped. A normal hyacinth in the wild would just have a couple of flowers on it. It's more like a bluebell. And these bulbs were planted in a natural setting, and the effort was to, or the intention was to bring back nature and culture into one overset. It seems that since the Renaissance, at least, nature and culture have become separated. And in this work, I was trying to bring them together again. Can we have another slide, please, Ian? This is another one from these works around 1989, 1990. This is a dianthus that was that I bred by taking pollen from the cheddar pink, which grows on the Cheddar Gorge near to where we live here, and hybridizing it, using it to pollinate some very, very cultivated carnations that come from the pink, which have been bred for 500 years or so. Can we have the next slide, please, Ian? So here's the cheddar pink on the edge of the Cheddar Gorge there. You can just see it against the green of the slope there. And the next slide, please, Ian. And these were I took the pollen from the cheddar pink and used it to fertilize these things. This is Allwood Brothers in Kent. I particularly like the fact that he's watering there with a fag hanging out of his mouth there. So these carnations have been bred from those tiny little alpine type pinks that are on the edge of the Cheddar Gorge. And in bringing the pollen and the ovaries of these together, it was a kind of nature culture hybrid. So it was, although it doesn't look like Blake, it has a very Blakean theme in that it's bringing things together. It's repairing division. We have another slide, please, Ian. Oh yes, I just put this one in. It's an Isaac Oliver from the Victor and Albert Museum. about 1590, and you can see in the little girl's hand there that she's got a bred pink at this point. So instead of the 5-petal pink that the natural ones on the Cheddar Gorge are, this one's already in 1590 being bred to have about 22 petals, I think they were. So making work like this does its work on you. What was happening within me through making this work was repairing that division that was being symbolized by the nature culture division outside of me. There was a kind of internal component of that, which I think was gradually being repaired. And then in the early 1990s, I began a set of work that, in a sense, I think, looking back on it, shows you what it was like to feel repaired. So let's just have another slide, please, Ian. So these were photographs made with a large pinhole camera, and you have, instead of one pinhole, you've got 25,000 pinholes. So when you point it at the sky, it sees a lot of skies, but it also sees, if there's a sun in the sky, 25,000 suns. And it's where you place the pinholes that can arrange it into this sort of human constellation of suns. Let's have another slide to show you the variations that you can use in this method. And another one, please, Ian. And I'll just show you very briefly how they were made. Next slide. So here's the camera up on the rooftop, and on the top of the box, I mean, calling it a camera is to ennoble it slightly, I think. On the top of the box, there's a foil. If you just move the slide on again, please. So that's a tin foil that's been penetrated with all these 25,000 pinholes. And when it's placed on the top of the camera, all the little images of the sun fall onto the photographic paper in the bottom of the box. So there's no blowing up of a small negative. It actually falls onto a life-size sheet of paper. Another slide. So that shows you the result. Just go back again and then forward again. So that's the kind of technique that I'm using there. So one more slide, please, Ian. There you go. So this feeling of being repaired made me think the kind of radiance that these things have made me think of Blake's picture. I think it's now called Albion a Rose. One more slide. And it made me think, what kind of motifs does he have here? It used to be called Glad Day. You know, it's a radiant image, and I noticed that the spectrum of colors around the figure there seemed to mirror in some way the colors of the Zoa circles in that picture, which is called Milton's Track, you know, which is the classic illustration of the four Zoas as a diagram. So I just wondered if this indicated, this picture was somehow indicating a radiant moment in Blake's life at this time. And I'll go on to speculate what that might be. So just go back, please, Ian, to one slide. So after a while, having made this series of figures which are made out of suns, it became of interest to me why I'd chosen the various figures. And I began to understand that most of them had been people that I dreamed about. And that so the whole cast of characters from this set were, I began to see them as representing internal entities, internal energies, because as everyone will know, that the figures in one's dreams are not just themselves, they also represent internal parts of the dreamer's mind. And once I understood this, that they were sort of personifications of internal forces, internal energies, then obviously we're in Blake territory. And it was at this point that I really started to think about Blake and to use him in as a kind of creative foil, really. And at this point, I was also beginning to muse about the process of repair that I was, that I felt that I'd undergone through making those plant works. And so I started a series of drawings which describe the trajectory, the kind of psychological trajectory of that healing process. So if you could just show another slide, please, Ian, and one more. Yeah, here we go. So these were from a series done in about 1999 or thereabouts, which I called the Mancunian Heresy. I am a Mancunian, and they do describe a kind of genesis in a way. So it being 1999, it was amusing for me to, because of all the apocalyptic stuff that was going on at the time, to give it that title. Can we have another slide, please? So what was going on in these pictures, because if you're describing mental events, obviously they are intangible and immaterial, and you need a material carrier. Now, Blake, when he's faced with this situation, obviously uses his personified figures, but he also uses the city as the carrier, the location for the mental drama that he's trying to describe, the immaterial drama that he's trying to describe. So he uses obviously Golgonooza, and he's using Jerusalem in later on. I was using, can we have one more slide? I was using nuclear power. This is in fact a nuclear fusion reactor, which I went to visit at Culham in Oxfordshire. And I was interested, obviously, in using, personifying the atoms that were being fused together. This is a reactor which uses the same process as the sun does to make light and heat. And the other area that I was using as a carrier for this description of mental events was the womb. So another slide, please, Ian. So these are IUDs, intrauterine devices, which are obviously contraceptive devices. And the idea was that I would be using the womb as a symbol for the mind, and it came, I suppose, from the idea that when one thinks of something, we use the word conceive. We conceive an idea, and so there was a kind of contrast between conceiving an idea and conceiving, contraception. So that in the creative process, when one was blocked, then the mental womb, as it were, was filled with one of these contraceptive devices. Can we have another slide? So they ended up drawings here which had kind of actual slits in the canvas, which interfered with the narrative that was being described. One more slide, please, Ian. And they also had interuterine devices attached to them. But I found that although this process got started, that in some strange way that it wasn't fertile. And I think it wasn't fertile for me because it didn't lead on to a whole run of works in this manner. And the feeling was, I think, that the problem for me was working from a preconceived mythic system. So I'd worked all this out on paper, and there seemed to be good reason to write it down and get the myth sorted out before making the work. And eventually, it got so large that I write it out onto rolls of, or the back of rolls of wallpaper, so that the myth would start over on the left, and then I would just roll the paper out until the myth had concluded. It was a sort of Genesis myth. But every time I came back to it, there was no way into the mythic system. It was too complicated to hold in the mind at any one time. And so I would have to rehearse the whole thing from the beginning. And by the time I got through to the end of it, it had changed shape. It had morphed. And this was not something that I had planned or even noticed at first. It just seemed to grow. It seemed as if it had a mind of its own, basically. And at this point, I had to abandon it. And it just became so tangled in revisions, which were not conscious revisions. They were things that had grown through the process of going through the myth again, that I abandoned the whole technique. And but it put me in mind of going to the British Museum and looking through the Vela manuscript, where you see endless revisions as the myth seems to, that Blake's working with, seems to grow of its own accord. Can we just have another slide, please, Ian? And another, please. You can see all the additions and the crossings out there. And I think Blake did abandon the manuscript. I just wondered if there was a similar thing that had happened, that somehow the myth had a mind of its own and had grown in this similar way, to the point where, in his case, he changed the plan of the myth from being just a kind of dualistic battle between Urizen and Luva, I think it was in the beginning, and then invented the density of the whole four Zoa system as he was working on this manuscript. And that's in fact the revision there. I'm just going to show you what happened when I gave up control. So can we have another slide, please? So these pictures are from more recent years, but the way that I work on these is just to follow whims. When I go into the studio, I have no plan of how the picture is going to work. and the figures may change. It's almost like a seance room where some of the characters from my mythic story, which seems to be there in the background, but isn't being illustrated from a prior text, as it were. Some of these characters seem to want to walk on stage into the images, and then other characters may come in, there may be interactions, things get painted out, more things get painted in, and the whole thing grows. And at the time that one's working on it, there is no sense that a mythic story is being created. But after 20 years of working in this way, one can see that a kind of mythic structure has grown. So let's have another slide. These are things from the last 5 years or so, and another one. And another one, please, Stephen. And a detail from this one, please. So what's the nature of what happens? Assuming that this that the text, that the Vela text that Blake was working on at the time, assuming that the Vela text began to, as it were, write itself, not in a conscious way from Blake's pen, but somehow from its own creation. What actually happens to the Vela text? If you look through the Blake literature, the main thing that people say is that it becomes non-linear. So, in other words, that there are lots of events happening simultaneously, and it becomes non-sequential. It's almost as if it changes from a kind of two-dimensional structure into a three-dimensional structure where the mythic threads go through the floors and the ceilings, as well as down the corridors of the direction of the mythic story. So it becomes this kind of 3D creation. It becomes simultaneous. Now, there's an interesting context for this in art history, from Romantic history of the time that Blake was writing. And I'm just going to show you, Ian, another slide, please. Yeah, here we go. So this is a Gainsborough. It's called The Woodman, from the 1770s, I think it must be. And what's going on at the time during Blake's early lifetime is that there are various, well, academics call them cults of the primitive, cults of the child. So what they're really saying is that certain figures begin to have an excessive amount of interest and involvement placed on them. So the primitive is one of them. And the next slide, please. Children, the cult of the child, also becomes something at this point. This is a Philip Otto Runge of the Hulsenbeck children from about 1805 or 6 or thereabouts. Next slide, please. Another cult at this time that begins is the cult of the mad. This is Richard Dadd. He's painting here in the mental asylum in which he was incarcerated after killing his father. I'll just show you another slide, please. This is the finished picture, the Titania and Oberon, I think it is, which is in the Tate. And another cult, another slide, please, Ian. I can never find a great picture of Thomas de Quincey, but the cult is of the drugged. And all of these characters become, all of these types, human types, become extremely interesting for the culture at the time that Blake was coming into formation. And what linked this, the interesting thing for me is what links them. What links them is that they're all pre-linguistic or post-linguistic. So what I mean by that is that the primitive, the woodman, is being is of interest to the culture at the time, in that he's in the fantasy, at least, less linguistically able than the urban elite who are showing interest in him. And similarly with the child is shown as a figure of admiration, because it's before language has been, as it were, downloaded into the mind. And in the case of the mad, it's post-linguistic, because it's because the way that the mind works has not got that logical sequencing that is a characteristic of left hemisphere language creation. And similarly with the drugged, the De Quincey thing is that the mind has been disabled from using that sequential system that the left hemisphere uses. And obviously I keep saying the word left hemisphere. Many of you will be thinking McGilchrist and Rod Tweedy. So it seems that what Blake arrived at in Vela, when the narrative becomes much denser and three-dimensional rather than two-dimensional, and non-sequential and simultaneous, is very similar to this this situation where people are being, these kind of cult figures are being valued for that mental property, which is not left hemisphere sequencing of logical linguistic creation. It's very similar in a sense to Blake's idea of eternity, I think. That simultaneity seems to resonate with this idea. So what happens around the same time as the Vela manuscript is being revised and the Four Zoa system is being invented at that moment, is that Blake begins to, as I say, own the Urizen figure. So in other words, he begins not to demonize Urizen as an external force, as he had done in the earlier books, the Book of Urizen. He seems to see Urizen within himself, and as a great systematizer himself, I'm sure if one had to give the talent of being systematic to any of the Zoas, it would be given to Urizen. So I think at this point, Blake is somehow owning the fact that the energy that has got him out of bed to fight Urizen every day since he began to work is an energy that is turned against himself, against part of himself. And at the same time, as he realizes this is an internal battle, it seems to me that his focus in his work begins to be more solely about forgiveness. And it's interesting, I think, that they seem to be linked in some way. And it's this it's the theme of forgiveness that I want to explore in the second part of the talk. And I'll start the second part with another quote from Northrop Frye, again from the 1969 edition of Fearful Symmetry. Here's what he has to say. I wrote Fearful Symmetry in World War II, a time that provides parallels with Blake's time and useful for understanding Blake's attitude to the world. Today, now that reactionary and radical forces alike are once more in the grip of the nihilistic psychosis that Blake described so powerfully in Jerusalem, one of the most hopeful signs is the immensely increased sense of urgency and immediacy of what Blake had to say. So it's this part of the text that I was interested in. Now that the reactionary and radical forces alike are once more in the grip of a nihilistic psychosis, it sounded very much like the polarized world that we seem to be existing in more and more today. So I mentioned at the beginning, I mentioned those list of contemporaries that Blake used, and it begs the question, who might we use? If we take a leaf out of Blake's book, alongside using Blake and the rest of those figures that he used, who else might we use? And the answer for me came from thinking about the nature of the Zoas. In that Blake seemed to think that the Zoas were innate. This is one of the reasons that he had problems with John Locke, in that John Locke suggested that the human mind comes from external experience and learning. Blake seems to understand that aspects of the mind are that we are born with them, they're innate. And the Zoas, yes, they describe faculties. So Urizen is obviously reason, Luva are the emotions, etc. But as they come to life in Blake's epic poems, I think we experience them less as faculties. So they're less like a kind of Freudian view of a kind of layered psyche with, stratification of the different types of mentality. They're less layered than they are kind of horizontal. It's as if they are a system of personality traits or temperaments, like the four humors that they're related to are. And this set me on the path to studying personality psychology. And I started to get out from the library lots of books on textbooks, university textbooks on personality psychology. And the way that the personality psychologists divide human temperaments, so in other words, the Zoas of our day, is divided up into 5 rather than 4. Blake would obviously call these personality traits spiritual traits rather than psychological traits. And again, personality psychologists like Blake understand that these traits are innate and that they're not things that we learn, but they're inevitable character styles of thinking that we contain from the beginning. Let's just can you put another slide up, please? Yes. So okay. So here's the Milton's tract image, and then one more, please. So here are the personality traits: openness and its contrary, conscientiousness and its contrary, extroversion and its contrary, agreeableness, neuroticism, and both of their contraries. And they're seen by personality psychology at the moment as useful at a group level. So that any group of people, we obviously all contain elements of that, but certain parts of society, certain groups in society score more heavily for some of these traits. So there'll be people who are more open to experience, people who are more conscientious, people who are more extrovert, less extrovert, etc., etc. And it's seen as useful at group level because it confers fitness to the group. So, for instance, conscientiousness is seen as a trait which preserves structures that have already evolved, whereas openness is a propensity to be able to be open to new experience. So it's obviously useful for a group to be to have conscientious individuals who can preserve structures of social structures that already work, but it's also very useful for the group to have people who are open to new experience and new structures. So if the environment outside of the group changes, then the group can adapt. Now, the thing that interested me most about this modern Zoa system is that two of the traits, and I'm going to link this to Blake's concentration on forgiveness, two of the traits predict voting preference. So that those people who score highly for conscientiousness are very likely to vote in a right of center direction, whereas those who score highly for openness have a propensity to vote in a left of center position. Obviously, you know, it's not a hard and fast rule. And as soon as I realized that these traits were evolved and that they are innate, I personally depolarized. So once I understood that the group was like human society was like an organism, and that the various traits are conferring fitness on the group in as if they are separate organs within the organism, but which make the organism work as a kind of ecosystem, which has, you know, various abilities. Then it seemed to me that I could no longer throw books at the radio when people I disagree with politically are being given a voice. It just seemed to produce a state of forgiveness in me. And I was very interested in reading further books on this. There's a particularly good book by George Lakoff, which looks at the metaphor systems that the political parties use, the nurturant mother and the strict father models. So it also suddenly explained to me why most votes in general elections seem to have a 50-50 share of the popular vote, and that that those traits are equally distributed in society, so that there is openness at around 50% and conscientiousness around 50% in terms of the scoring there. So again, that made me rethink my my former thought that that those who I disagree with politically could be re-educated or brought in line with my way of thinking. I suddenly began to see that these 5 zoas were all necessary for a functioning society, just as Blake at the end of Jerusalem brings all the zoas together, rehabilitates Urizen as part of the 4, and that they all exist in a state of harmony in the final of Jerusalem. And so I'll end there, in fact, and just say that it suddenly made me realize that this personality psychology should be taught at junior school and secondary school level to hopefully depolarize our situation today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. That's extraordinary talk, which I had anticipated it would be extraordinary. Yeah, that particular model of psychology is unknown to me. The 4 zoas are often mapped onto Jung, but those things are, or can be, I'm not suggesting that your parallels are, but can be reductive, in as much as Jung has that artistic capacity to blend and let them become fluid and through emanation interact and change and yeah, and all those things really.
Well, it's interesting, you know, nobody likes to be labeled, as it were, categorized, but you know, Blake's at a dinner party and says to somebody, "You're very Eurizenic," or "You're very earthonal," or you know, those categories that he came up with were equally difficult to swallow, I would imagine.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm just thinking they're always in play in the poetry. You know, metamorphosing and changing. I love the way that you pronounce Vela correctly. Constantly having rivalry with my colleagues over that, because I mean she's got veils, you know. What I want to do though now is to let other people ask their questions, make their comments. So everyone's very free to put their camera on, to use either the react button to put your hand up. That's probably at the bottom of your screen, or to raise your hand physically. And if we spot it, we'll put you up and you can ask Chris a question or make a comment. So, oh, here's a question popping up in the chat here. From Jane Montague. Jane, do you want to ask your question in person?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes.
I've got something on my screen here. Yes, no, I was just interested, as you were talking about integration of opposing ideas or energies, whether you had investigated Eastern philosophy like Taoism, Buddhism, the Bhagavad Gita, that sort of thing. And was William Blake, in fact, exposed to those sort of ideas as well?
Personally, I haven't. No, not much anyway. Only, you know, in the way that one might have read Fritjof Capra or something like that long ago. But I'm not qualified to answer the latter part of the. No, I'm not really a Blake scholar, but there may be. Stephen may have an opinion about that.
Yeah, Blake. We know that Blake read the Bhagavad Gita, and that of course he also was very aware of the Kabbalah and Kabbalistic thinking. So those are certainties. I've been reading the Bhagavad Gita myself in some detail because I thought, oh, I know he read it, so I'd better get
Yeah.
on with it.
Yes, because it deals with quite difficult ideas, doesn't it? In a very beautiful way.
It does. It does.
Mm.
It has some of the sort of, well, it has the epic qualities of a lot of Blake's major prophetic poems. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
More questions or comments, please? I think everybody's pondering the depth of what you were talking about there. Firstly, I love the way that you described the Vela manuscript as the sequences, the simultaneity, the things, the threads moving through the floor, as it were, and through the ceiling, and spreading in all directions, and the simultaneity of action and the transformations that occur. Blake has such a free hand with that in that manuscript, and I have at points wondered if the manuscript is, in a sense, finished, and if it's a text that is like his psyche in that way, and the psyche is like the text in all its complications and
Well, it's often described as the revision part of it, and the beginning of it turning itself into something that's not just a dualistic battle between Urizen and Luba and the invention of the four zones. It's often, when I've read people on it, they've described it as an intended development to make it non-linear and make it simultaneous. And it just struck me that it might be just something that happened to him, and that my experience of giving up working from a pre-existing mythic text that I'd prepared in advance, as it were, produced work that doesn't seem to have a direction or intention at the time that one's working on it, and it becomes far more less easy to understand at the time that one's working on it, and then after months or even years, you start to detect a pattern, and in another sense, that way of working is very like the non-linearity of dreaming. And there's something about the Vela manuscripts developed technique of non-linear narrative that also shares something with dreaming. And it just struck me that it may not have been, that his main decision, shall we say, was to go with what had happened to him rather than try and cajole it back into a kind of linearity. So that was the fantastic decision that he made, rather than deciding to use that structure in a conscious way. It's interesting. It struck me also that Blake may be the first person to have used that non-linear structure. I mean, it's common nearly 100 years later when modernism begins, and Eliot and Joyce used that kind of non-linear narrative structure. You know, and it seemed to parallel that when I was talking about the various cults at the time in the 18th century. One of the cults, the cult of the child, you know, what's being prized is that pre-adult, fully socialized, fully linguistic type of mental process. But all as the artists who are interested in that do is depict children rather than draw like children. And in the sense that Picasso, in actually adopting childlike drawing technique, obviously a lot, you know, 100 years later, he's the first to actually do what the interest had been in the Romantic period. And it seems like Blake may occupy the same kind of position, in that all of those cults were involved in prizing a non-linguistically linear logical mental ability. And Blake, who I can't think of anybody before Blake who actually uses it, rather than just depicts people who are said to be gifted in that way.
Yeah, he's the most extraordinary pioneer. And of course, the two authors that you mentioned, Joyce and Eliot, both strongly influenced by Blake. Joyce lectured on Blake and clearly loved him. And Eliot sort of is quite points quite critical of Blake for not working in a proper tradition. But when he's writing four quartets, he puts in a letter that he can't keep Blake out of the poem. And of course, that's a poem about time and simultaneity and the tension between that and sequence and life moving through. But yes, Vela is the most extraordinary text in that way, and he quarries from it for the major prophecies. But it does, that fluidity is exactly what it says, the fluidity of a dream. It's very beautiful. Jennifer Jesse has a raised hand. Jennifer.
Yes. I wanted to thank you. So can you hear me? Am I?
Yep.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I've got a box in front of my, there we go. I wanted to thank you for a really fascinating talk. And I want to go back to just the title of your piece and what you talked about at the very beginning, using Blake. And the people that Blake used, and your process of, you know, when you hear something or read something, I can use that for this thing over there. And I've always had such an ambivalence towards that in my own experience, because I feel so utilitarian. You know, it's like this great work, and I'm not going to really read the whole great work, you know, but I've read something that I can use over here. And so I tug something out here and I tug something out there. And it's always kind of felt it's a little bit negative to me. But your talk helped me realize that what we're doing in that process is we're recognizing and we're creating resonances with these other ideas that have come our way. I often have the sense that it came my way for some purpose. And you know, I don't really know how to put language on this, but when we do that, we're changing something about the trajectory of the original idea or the original image. We're changing its trajectory. We're changing its energy. You know, and everybody who does this, it's just like this living organism. And so, I mean, that's just kind of the image that I came to from listening to your talk. So thank you very much for that.
Can I just add something? I mean, one of the things I'm interested in is how things that we are interested in the work of other people, they never really have the function that they have in the work of that person. when one imports them into one's own life, it becomes invested with what you, how you read that person, and that's always completely morphing the original into something deeply personal and deeply symbolic within one's own psychological ecology, or whatever you want to call it. And I also find it interesting how, as I said at the very beginning, that there's some aspect of the psyche that's always looking for things which one is not aware of, in the way that when a dream is put together, it's very often things that one did not notice or pay any attention to during the day. One's conscious self didn't anyway, but something inside, which is the entity that puts dreams together, recognized that thing, screen grabbed it, as it were, and put it to its own symbolic use. And that for me is a wonderful and amazing process. Who knows what I call that entity the dream sender, but so I personify it as a character. But I know that Jung, for instance, well, maybe Jung would personify it as well, but he would look at it as a kind of homeostatic device, which is looking to restore balance in the psyche, and is always looking for symbolic things during the day to use as part of its lexicon when it's putting a dream message together.
Well, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, Camilla has said something very interesting in the chat. Camilla, would you like to manifest and make your comment? Be very good. Camilla's a fellow trustee, if she's around there. Otherwise, I shall relay. Yeah, she's having trouble turning her camera on, so I'll relay the question. She says, from your talk, I gathered you are particularly drawn to Blake's mythopoetic system. Have you explored Blake's early poetry / illustrations in your art as well?
Early, as in the 1780s, or up until songs, or?
Yes, I'm not sure if she's talking about the Minor Prophecy.
Or the Island in the Moon, was it?
Up until songs, she's saying.
Up until songs. Not really. I've been obviously The Marriage of Heaven and Hell and the songs have been things that I've read for many years, but I'm always drawn to the epic poems. I reread Jerusalem over the summer, and I mean, I tried to read it when I was in my 20s and bounced off it several times, but this year I managed to read it and enjoy it, and really the symbolism became readable, knowable, which it hadn't before. So yeah, it's the epic stuff that I'm mostly drawn to.
I think often we have to let it just happen to us like music, and then gradually things start to take form. The more we go in there. There's a comment and a question really from Jeffrey Moore to everyone. Jeffrey, can you manifest, or shall I relate your question? I shall relate it, I think. Yeah, thanks so much, Christopher, for your many fascinating insights. They also open or reopen a discussion about how much our learned behaviors, choices, and innate characteristics interact, build, and are built by society. The idea around an ecosystem of society is worthy of continued exploration.
Thank you. Yeah, I suppose, yeah, I possibly didn't emphasize it enough that my interest in Blake really is not in looking back at Blake, but using Blake as part of, as an example, and how to think about our own times. And as I began to try and explore at the end, the looking for contemporary version of the Zoas, particularly with having in mind that when he realized that Urizen was part of his own constitution, and began the great project um, to bring them all into harmony, as he does in Jerusalem, and the finale of Jerusalem, where they're all co-regents, as it were, of the psyche. That just seems like such a wonderful aim today. I know that Rob Tweedy and Ian McGilchrist look at the mind out of balance in terms of its over-reliance on left hemispheric thinking. But it was in particular the politics, the terribly polarized politics that we're enduring at the moment. It was looking at that in terms of Blake's harmonization of the four Zoas. And as soon as I realized in that the personality psychology that I was reading from the university textbooks, that there was an implied reason why political divergence has evolved, then it suddenly seemed so much more palatable that there were people who I profoundly disagree with on the other side of the political divide that I could embrace. And so Blake's whole emphasis on forgiveness after Vela in Milton and in Jerusalem suddenly became something that I understood deeply within. And as I say, it's prevented me now from throwing things at the radio too much.
Mutual forgiveness of each vice, such are the gates of paradise.
But of course, the problem is that what the polarization that we're experiencing is that the left and the right have become terrible caricatures, grotesque caricatures of their normal rest state. They've become kind of hyperactive in the extremes, but still the whole Blakean forgiveness seems to be able to give me a way of looking at those things as terrible caricatures of something which is which has when they're not in their caricatured state, a kind of beauty of completion in a society, that there are types of political thought which, yes, are organs within a greater organism, and that all of them are necessary and natural.
I very much agree about forgiveness. Ken Blake writes, I forgive you, you forgive me for all eternity. That's a very nice, yeah.
I'd be interested to know, I mean, that's just an observation on my behalf of a situation which, has brought about depolarization for me. I'd be interested to know if there's anybody with suggestions on how that might work as a political system, in the sense that you know, would it be proportional representation? Would that you know, you kind of imagine that Blake would be in favor of a vote for all of the Zoas, you know, rather than just the two dominant ones.
Yes. It'd be preferable to Apocalypse. Ewan
Yeah.
Hazelwood has his hand raised. Ewan, come on in.
Hey Chris,
Hey,
good to see you,
Ewan.
man. Yeah, nice. That was a really cool talk. Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, I guess I just wanted to say, yeah, this has been a really interesting thing. I saw this event up on the Blake Society page, and I'm training to be an actor at the moment. And
But you studied politics. Come on, give
I
us
know.
give us the political angle.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, and I'm really interested in sort of building my own craft, and it was really interesting to be affirmed in a way. It's something that I've been sort of feeling around, that, you know, I've been trying to read Blake, which I'm relatively new to, on a regular basis, to try and kind of feed my subconscious, so that when I enter the acting space, that as long as I'm present and trust that those kind of deep unconscious forces will seep through, if I allow my presence to basically maintain. So yeah, it was really helpful to hear you talk about that, because I'm kind of feeling my way around, and it's like that left hemispheric thing a lot of time when I'm reading Blake or other stuff, is I'm trying to, I'm like, I want meaning, or and it's the same with an acting performance. I want it to be this way, but it's really most kind of beautiful and subtle, I suppose, when it kind of comes in a way that you don't expect, I suppose. And it just kind of appears. So yeah, man.
Well, Blake famously writes about, he describes, you know, line after line appearing to him. What does he say, Stephen? Something about just taking dictation? Or you're muted.
I'm muted. 30 lines at a time.
30 lines at
Direct
a time.
dictation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
30 or 40 lines at a time. He writes, yeah, in a letter. So it's direct. That's part of the nature of vision for him. I think it's just flowing in.
So Chris, would you say for you, is it sort of on a regular basis, sort of inundating yourself with just sort of receiving without too much sort of conscious control, any given thinker, writer, artist, as a means to influence your work? And then the point is, you just get to that into your workspace with an open mind, and you let it roll.
Yeah, I suppose in a way, kind of influence is kind of behind me now. I think as a young artist, I think it's important to expose yourself to things that are maybe of use to you, which, you know, you would say are influential on you. I think as I've got older, I've become more, it's as if that's all stocked within me, that I don't even think about it anymore. And that when I go into the studio, I'm just not thinking at all. I'm obeying whims, I call them. So they're a little idea will start up. I need to paint this character or that character or whatever. And I don't really think too hard about why until the story that grows in the telling as the picture evolves has come to some kind of degree of development. And then I may leave the studio and begin to try and think about what's happened. So it is a kind of improvised. Yeah, it's you know what, the direct comparison I would make is with impro theatre. Or do you know the Commedia dell'arte tradition, which is you know, it's a Venetian comedic tradition with 4 or 5 stock character actors who have a backstory. They all know their backstory of who they're supposed to be, and they're caricatured characters. But when they go on stage, one will go on stage and another will join. They don't know the plot, and so it's an improvised plot, and it develops the hilarious scenario that develops as they interact with each other. It's obviously coming from them knowing what their character type is, and they just ham it up against the opposing character type. And you end up with a fantastic performance, which has just appeared out of nowhere. And that seems to me how these paintings emerge, my paintings anyway. I don't know how Blake worked in his painted imagery. I know that he has his mythic system worked out in great detail, but how he allows those characters onto his paper when he's drawing or painting them, I'm not sure. Although in the written work after Vela, it seems that they are appearing as images in dreams do. That there's something non-conscious about it going on, and he's going with the flow, and that's what's knitting together that multi-layered, non-logically sequenced structure that Vela and Milton and Jerusalem have.
There is there's Blake's Jerusalem as visionary theatre, Ewan, and often it is, yeah, describes that in terms of this extraordinary flow of characters and staging in that way. I think Blake, I'm just thinking about the letter, I think he says 30 lines, 30 or 40 lines at a time without thought or effort. So it's a direct thing. It's not conscious at all. Rather like your experience of having to not think, Chris, when you're painting, to make it work on another level. My visionary equivalent to Blake in theatre is actually Artaud. And Blake, Jung, and Artaud all have a strong Gnostic undercurrent, which I didn't discover until I found myself drawn to all of them. So, that might be something to look at, because Artaud very much wants to stage the unconscious and throw off all the social conditioning in the process, really. Yeah.
Amazing. Thanks, guys. Really interesting.
Thank you, Ewan.
Yeah.
Hope to see you soon.
Wonderful. Yeah. Oh, one last question from Martin. Oh, it's John as well. We let Martin in, John. We'll do that. Martin.
Okay. Yes, first, thanks, Chris, as ever, fascinating. And as you well know, this all chimes with so much of what I'm going through at the moment. You were talking about the cult of child. And obviously, I guess what you're saying there is they are the untarnished conduits, I guess, in many ways. So the Victorians really like that as well. And which is probably where I have an advantage, in that you can, as Ewan was saying, you can continue that. If you're not particularly well read, you can still be quite fresh to ideas coming through. And if you're slightly ADHD or whatever, you can't concentrate on text and reading and absorbing too much stuff, which is what I find. I find that comes quite naturally, that state of keeping yourself childlike, possibly. And it's also interesting, you were bringing up the Gnostic idea, and I was thinking that if you are religious, of course, then the idea of getting back to the bare bones of yourself and knowing yourself so you can then be of use to the world outside. So that idea, coming back to the idea of forgiveness, if you can forgive yourself, then you're in a position where you can forgive others because you can understand. So I thought all those wonderful ideas that are going round and round, just fantastic. So yeah, lots to read up and enjoy that. I've taken lots of notes, which I'm gonna get again.
Thank you, Martin.
No, it's fantastic. Thank you.
The Gnostic thing for me is the human divine. I mean, it's the the divine inside the human. That's the spark of divinity, which is very Blakean. John, I think there is just time. Lovely to see you.
Hello, John.
Hello. Lovely to see you both. Yeah, just a quick thought. I was sort of slightly following up on what Ewan was asking about as well, I think, from a slightly different angle. It struck me that it's really interesting that you talk about going into the studio and just working from a whim and going with the flow. And yet also, as you've sort of ably demonstrated this evening, you're clearly quite a sort of systematic thinker as well. So I just sort of wondered how those meet in your sort of work as an artist broadly, and does this sort of theory side of things kind of come upon reflection later? And I wondered if in some sense that sort of works as a sort of, you think that sort of functions as some kind of scaffolding that when you're in the studio and you're really not thinking, that still underlying it, that all that stuff is there and comes through somehow.
Yeah, I think that's true. That I do have two kind of mental modes, and one is in the studio where I really cannot think. It seems that if I start to think, if I start to use my out of studio thinking head in the studio, I get terribly depressed. It makes me unable to work, and I kind of end up lying down on the floor. It just, I mean, it literally, it's a very heavy emotional feeling that comes over me, and I just can't work. So I've learned to just be somehow, I kind of go in the studio and approach a canvas as if I'm painting the front door. As in, just, slap it on, follow, as if you're trying to cover an area rather than paint a picture, and allow a story to develop. But as you rightly say, there's another aspect to it where when you leave the studio, one might be tempted to start thinking about it. What just happened? What happened in there? And that's part of my nature. I'm always drawn to analyzing what just happened. Often not exactly on the same day. It could be weeks later, just as one might have a dream that you don't understand at the time and may not understand for years. But there's something in me that's always gnawing away, thinking, whoa, something's going on in there, and I would like to know what it is and how it links to all the other things that have happened in there over the years. Because after you've been working for many years, there's a lot of images piled up in your head that have gone previously. Can I ask you a question? Because I know you do several images per page. So, whereas, what do you call those? They're frames, are they, on a comic image?
Panels, I guess. Panels, probably.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, when you're confronted with a piece of paper, you're going to make 4 or 5 images pretty much on that day. You're working on something where you can't be precious with
Yeah.
You know, you've got to get cracking. I would imagine that in a way is what has happened to me over the years in the studio. I've got less and less precious about that piece of canvas. It just seems to be a frame in a comic book that I'm going to press on with until I get to the next frame, and then so and so, so and so.
Yeah, I think I definitely recognize that. I think that I really struggle with the kind of perfectionism thing, and what you really have, like, I think, you know, like comics and so sort of unforgiving in that sense. I imagine animation's even worse. The number of images you're trying to generate, yeah, that you have to kind of think about the whole idea of the book and the story is what you're trying to, you know, that's what you're working towards, and to try not to, yeah, privilege each tiny picture as a sort of perfect little thing. Yeah.
Well, that's such a wonderfully freeing attitude.
Yeah, well, it should be. I'm not sure I always manage to get there, but yeah, yeah. I mean, it makes you think. I often think this about Blake now as well. That you know, when you're talking about, and Stephen was saying about, you know, the dictation idea, that there's literally the Holy Spirit or whoever it is, or his subconscious dictating this stuff to him. That you know, it's wonderful that we can then go in and sort of analyze it and think, what exactly did he mean by that aspect of this iterative, recursive myth that he's telling. But you know, the more I make art and the more I sort of talk to other artists and study other artists, I think in some sense that this doesn't sound as profound as I mean it. They just have to do what they have to do, right? And it's just you're just processing stuff, and you just, that's how it splurges out onto the page. And then, as you say, you figure out kind of what that means and what that later, and you see it in the sort of the larger context later, maybe. Anyway, good stuff.
Thank you, John. That's fantastic. Nathan Birnbaum has had to leave. He says, thank you, Christopher. Your work is absolutely extraordinary, and this talk was so stimulating.
Thank you, Nathan.
I heartily concur with that. Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much. I found that fascinating. I love that you call Vela Vela, and I'm so looking forward. You're so fascinating to talk to online and offline. So I hope to see you offline very soon.